Namaste, Sitaram, good day everyone. On Saturday, November 14, 2020, Trinidad and Tobago, along with people all over the world, will celebrate Diwali. It is my pleasure to tell you about the origin and development of this festival here in our country. My presentation is entitled The History of Diwali in Trinidad and Tobago from the Plantation to the Present Day. First, I want to begin by talking about Diwali during the indentureship period. Diwali arrived in Trinidad and Tobago 175 years ago with the immigration of Indian indentured laborers. From 1845 until 1917, 147,900 Indian laborers emigrated to Trinidad under the Indian indentureship labor scheme. The majority of these laborers were Hindus, and they introduced Diwali to our country. During the indentureship period, the colonial government did not promote Diwali as a separate festival of any importance. It was just seen as one of those things that the laborers brought from India. It was categorized under the general topic of Indian culture. Importantly though, the laborers were allowed to practice various aspects of their culture, as the planters believed that it would make them a more contented people. The planters felt that if Indian laborers did not have any reason to be dissatisfied with their everyday situation, there would be a more productive labor force. Of course, allowing the Indian indentured laborers to practice their culture was a way to justify the labor scheme and to show that it was vastly different from African enslavement, where African culture was prohibited. So while the planters and colonial authorities did not openly encourage the Indian laborers to engage in cultural activities, at the same time, they did not actively stop them from celebrating the festivals. So festivals such as Diwalis and occasions such as weddings and the birth of their children, as long as these celebrations did not interrupt their work on the plantation, and as long as they were not seen as a threat to the peace of the colony, they were allowed to practice them. Thus, not only did Diwali survive during the indentureship period, but it maintained much of the form in which it left India. Now, I have to tell you that there are barely any written records of Diwali as it was celebrated during this period of indentureship. The few oral sources and interviews with those who lived during that time tell us of an agricultural society and a people who celebrated on the estates. In the days leading up to Diwali Day, they cleaned their barracks and they fasted from meat and alcohol. On Diwali Day, they worked on the sugarcane fields as usual all day. After work, they would return to their barracks and they were dressed in their best saris and dhotis. The Indian women came together to cook for everyone on the plantations. They lit diyas that they had made from mud with ghee that they made themselves. They gathered as a group to listen to stories from the Ramayana and to sing and dance. One particular story, that of Lord Ram, returning to Ayodhya after 14 years of exile in the forest, that held a special place in their hearts because they identified with Lord Ram. They saw themselves as exiled in another land, away from their family and away from their villages, just like Lord Ram. Lord Ram's return to Ayodhya gave them a sense of hope, and they too believed that one day they would return to Bharat Mata or Mother India. Now, what happened after the indentureship system ended? So, on January 1st, 1920, all indentured contracts were ended and the indentureship system ceased completely in Trinidad. So for the next 20 to 30 years, however, the majority of the Indians remained engaged in agricultural activities. This meant that they had not climbed beyond the lowest rung of the economic ladder, and hence they continued to be perceived as economically less worthy than the other groups in the society. Their culture and social behavior continued to be seen as strange by the majority of the population. And that was mainly because of the limited contact that they, the Indians, had with the wider population. At this point, Indian cultural celebrations remained low-keyed. They remained centered on the estates and the Indian villages, and the colonial government did not make any conscious attempt to encourage cultural activities amongst Indians. So basically what I'm saying is that Diwali was celebrated in much the same way as when the laborers were bonded to the estates. In order to get a more visual idea of how Diwali is celebrated, I interviewed Pandit Ganpat Maharaj, the spiritual leader of the Lakshmi Sabha Mandir in Claxon Bay. Pandit Ganpat occupies a leadership role as Upadharmachar of the Sanatan Dharma Mahasabha. And according to Pandit Ganpat, he remembered, and I quote, "My earliest memories of Diwali are from when I was about 5 years old. That would have been about 1945. It was the happiest time of the year for me. We had to go to the river and get the mud from the river to make the diyas. The river was near to the temple, and we would go with other kids and some parents. As little boys in the village, this was the best time for us. Everyone had to make their own diyas as there weren't any shops selling them at that time. We would collect the mud and we would shape it into diyas and put them to dry in the sun. If it rained, then we would put them to dry under the houses. Then we would go to the cotton tree and pick the cotton to make the wick. There were cotton trees all over, so it was easy to find cotton. We couldn't afford to buy oil, so we would make our own coconut oil to light the diyas. Those who had cows would make cow ghee. Claxon Bay was an agricultural village, so everybody had cows in those days. So we had enough ghee to use. Everything we made from scratch, and the entire family would come out to help. Preparation for Diwali would begin almost 4 months before, and before the actual day, everyone would start cleaning their homes and fasting from meat and alcohol. And on Diwali day itself, it was a time of great joy. There was a lot of music from the sound systems all over. I would wake up in the morning to Diwali songs playing loudly. There were 1 or 2 district radio stations, not national ones, which played religious songs. We would wake up in the morning and we would make prasad first, then cook lots of other food. It was a lovely event. At home, we would light the diyas, put the flowers by the Lakshmi picture, and light incense. Pandit Ganpat continued. It's only after many years that Diwali started changing and Diwali celebrations got bigger. People started bending the bamboo to make the arches and the different designs such as the Om. And that's when it started becoming a community celebration. Also, when the pottery places started making diyas to sell, it was easier for people to buy diyas rather than make them. The people started lighting a lot more diyas. 20 to 30 years ago, you would hardly find an individual calling a pandit at his home to do puja for Diwali. Everyone would do his own puja. But now, everyone has pandits at their home doing pujas. And not one puja, but many different types such as Lakshmi Puja, Durga Puja, Shiva Puja, etc. Unquote. Now, there was a change in the way in which Diwali was celebrated from the 1950s onwards. This was due to the emergence of an Indian middle class in Trinidad and Tobago. Here was a group of Indians, Indo-Trinbagonians, who started to make conscious attempts to propagate Indian culture in Trinidad and Tobago. By 1931, 23% of the total Indian population was literate, and approximately 10% of all Indians occupied professional positions in the colony. This small population of educated Indo-Trinidadians started promoting Diwali and other Indian festivals and celebrations. Those who were financially capable sponsored cultural activities in the villages and communities. This was a group which was in the process of emerging and attempting to construct its own identity within the wider society, and they used culture as a channel to do so. They encouraged Indo-Trinbagonians to come together, openly celebrating their Indian ancestry, engaging in cultural practices and embracing their Indian identity. It was during this period that Diwali celebrations increased throughout the country under the patronage of middle-class Indians in the country. Celebrations became more lavish as wealthy Indians assisted, and they became more community organized and community based. From the 1950s onward, Diwali began to leave the private domain and enter the public space. On September 18, 1950, general elections were held in Trinidad and Tobago, and a number of Hindus such as Bagai Sagan Maharaj, Shankar Maharaj and Ayodhya Singh were elected to parliament. It was the first time that Hindus had a political voice in Trinidad and Tobago. These politicians put pressure on the PNM government, led by Dr. Eric Williams, to declare Diwali a national holiday. After negotiations led by Bagai Sagan Maharaj, Diwali was officially declared a public holiday in 1966. Others, such as the UE Society for the Promotion of Indian Culture, SPIC, were also calling for Diwali to be made a public holiday. In fact, SPIC, under the leadership of Dr. Surajat and Ramachan, had been told that they could not light even one diya on campus, and they could not celebrate Diwali in the university. So that agitation for Diwali to be made a public holiday finally saw fruit. Once Diwali was made into a public holiday, there were large-scale celebrations all over the country. The most unique and beautiful thing about Diwali in Trinidad and Tobago is that it is celebrated throughout our country in one way or the other. It occupies a significant position in the national cultural landscape. It is one of the biggest religious and cultural celebrations in our country, and it has embraced Trinbagonians of all religions, all ethnic groups, and persons of all social standings. As we celebrate Diwali 2020, I wish each and every one of you and your family a safe and peaceful Diwali. Happy Diwali, everyone. Thank you very much.